Okay, so this is lecture number 8. We are going to talk about SVM, support vector machines, and kernel method, and also associate with the concept about this feature mapping function. So that will be the first hour. I hope I can finish these 2 topics on time, so we can leave enough time to talk about the single cell immune receptor profiling analysis. I would see both of those topics, the first hour and the next hour, will be a little bit difficult if you haven't heard about that before. I would like to listen to your feedback. See how many of you have any concept about the kernel. Who have any idea about the kernel? No idea. No response.
It's a word I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, in data science computation method, and especially machine learning classification algorithm, people talk about a lot of kernel. But many people, when they talk about kernel, means a lot of different things. There are a couple of different things here. So I will try to do a good job today to explain this concept behind. Okay, and also, how many of you heard about this single cell immune receptor profiling analysis? Any idea about what that means? No. Yeah, Ericus in the class certainly knows, because he studied this all the time. And Alyssa, how about you? No idea. Any other online students? So you see this today, it will be a challenge to me, okay? Explain those completely. It's not like a regression, you know, some of the regression, you know. Okay, so we still have to go back to very basic, because everything I'm going to explain can be traced back to the root of this very simple concepts, like dot product of 2 vectors and what that means. Okay, so we know this dot product is you have 2 vectors. If dot product of 2 vectors, you make the first vector become horizontal, that's row vector, and another column vector. So the product of this is a single number. Okay, so if I use different notation, let me show you another notation so we can get familiar with. If I use notation to represent the first vector, so I use W. Okay. That's my first AB. Okay, 2 dimension. We just talk about 2 dimension. Then I have an X. X is 2 coordinates, 2 dimension coordinate system, so I use X, Y. So the dot product between these 2 will be dot big X. Okay. Right. So this is AX plus BY. Right. And then next is how can we explain dot product using this geometric interpretation. So you know, you can consider this as projection of one vector onto another. So here A project onto B. So based on the definition, of cosine, cosine is this divided by A, the length of A. So you have the length of here, the projection as A times cosine theta. A is length of that, so you can write in this way. So that's your homework. I hope you still be able to very quickly and see, okay, if I want to compute the projection of A to B, I can just write A dot product B, because that's vector production, and then divided by the norm, the length of the B. Then that's the length of A project onto B. So I'm going to draw this using a slightly different angle on this picture here. So for example, if I have a vector, so I have vector W here. That's my W. And then I have X here. X color. So what's the projection of X onto W? Assume this is a theta here. Okay, our dot product is W X. So this equal to length of W times norm of X cosine theta, right? So the projection is this. That's a D. So according to what should be D? This projection should be the length of S, so the D should be this, right? So D is W X divided by. Is this correct? And length B is a dot product between my X vector dot product of W vector and divided by the norm of W. Because this green box is D. Correct? Okay. So you are ready to move on. We mentioned PCA. PCA is to find a new projection which indicate by, for example, if you consider these data points without separating them into red points and the blue circle, you treat them as a whole group, then your PC, the first PC will found will be this eigenvector indicated by this longest eigenvector in the black. We also mentioned last time this LDA, linear discriminant analysis. In this case, you want to consider the within the group, within the data points of each class. And then you want to find the projection, which is this green line. Then the project the dots on their group by themselves, but separate from other groups. So that's LDA and the PCA, the difference between them. And we also have source code last time to show, okay, how we can just easily compute those. Okay, today we are going to move to SVM, support vector machine. So I will start by see what's the difference between LDA and SVM. The purpose of them are the same. So LDA and SVM are the approaches you want to use to classify your data points into different groups. So LDA take approach that you found this projection, so you can separate data points nicely, and then you have new data points comes in, you know, depending on the projection, you will be able to classify the new data point to different groups. SVM is also trying to learn from training data. So you have separable data points. Then SVA will find a separator. So this separator is also a straight line if you have a two-dimensional system. And this line will separate the two clusters, two groups. And then, so you can use this as a discriminant line to separate your, classify your new data points. Well, the difference is LDA assume, for example, the two populations, two class, have same covariance and also follow the normality. So assume the data points are normal distributed, and also the covariance are not so different, okay, comparable between two classes. Otherwise, you will run into this similar as a density problem. You remember the example? We have one cluster is sparse data points, another is two very dense. If you don't have that, you run into the same kind of problem. And LDA is linear transformation to project your data and then to lower dimensionality subspace and maximize the class separatable. Okay. Well, SVM is more straightforward. It's not assume anything yet. You just found a boundary between your two classes of data, and then draw a straight line between them and try to separate them. So there's no assumption. They just found the points which close to each other. It doesn't care a lot of data points which far away from each other. It only care the data points very, very close by, the data points that belongs to different clusters. They are close by and difficult to separate. SVM will focus on those boundary area and try to find a straight line to separate them. When you run into high dimension, instead of 2 dimension, then 3 dimension or higher, and you actually will create a plane. So it's called a hyperplane. You separate your hyper dimensional space into different sections. You group cluster, not cluster, classifier data points into different subspace. But most of our illustration will be 2-dimensional because it's easy to explain, and hopefully you can imagine and generalize into the high dimension. Okay, so this SVM machine is a linear classifier it can be this linear model and mostly used in the classification problem and sometimes the regression. Also use it. It applies to both linear and nonlinear problems. So we will see, okay, how can they separate data points that unseparable linearly, but you can use SVM, this machinery, to solve the problem. There are transformation functions before you apply SVM to help you to do this nonlinear separable problem. Okay, so it will create a line or hyperplane depending on the dimensionality. The problem you have to separate data into class. So that's a very quick introduction of this. Let's see when SVM was invented or created. In 1943, the perception, the neuron, the concept had been proposed. Okay, at that time, the computer we have is in this form, so it's large enough to occupy the whole room. So you see the concept is already proposed even earlier than you have a portable machine at that time. And the Turing and talking about intelligence machinery, and then 1955, we have the first algorithm which can help to play this checker game. So SVM is also called support vector networks, proposed in 1963. Okay. Later, this same author, that's in 1995. Again, so the prototype of the idea was early, and this 1995, the paper just show you this famous the illustration of this problem had been proposed in this paper. So it becomes increasingly popular. I think the reason is it's effective, and the people found a lot of real world applications for that. Okay, let's jump into the underlying principle of SVM. Let's start by looking at this linear binary classification problem. So we have two sets of data, and the one class indicated by the green cross, and another class is red circle. So we can separate these two groups classification to classes, and using any of these lines to separate them. The problem is which one we are going to use. So now let's look at a simple example, and here we use linear algebra to define a simple binary classifiers to solve these problems and systemically. So we use some rules to not arbitrarily select a line to separate it. And this method implies there's a line, and to separate data points, which left are those red cross, and right are this green circle, and it indicates there's a line to separate it in the middle. So how this work? It will let's see. We have enough time to. I don't think we have enough time to do this. So I will just draw on this PowerPoint slide. And first, you will find the center of each of the cluster data points. The first is C+, where is this right circle, right cross, and the C minus, that's the center of green circle. Okay, so once you have C plus, C minus, you can compute a vector called W. W is C plus minus C minus. Okay, so that vector, so you know if you have C plus as vector, C minus as vector, the difference between that vector is a vector that between these two. So that's W here. Okay. Then you found the center of C plus and the C minus. You have another vector C. C is the center. Now, you have a new data point jumped in. This new data point is small x. So your job is to determine, to classify this x into either red cross or green circle group. So how can you do that? So you will take the difference between x and c. Okay, so you will compute x minus c. So that's a vector of here. Okay, let me use another different color. So you have your green vector. That's x minus c. Now you are going to do a dot product computation. So you will compute W dot product x minus c. Okay, so you know this is W, the length of this, times x minus c times cosine theta. So you have x has been given, so you have x1, y1, so you have this coordinate. You also have the coordinate for c, because c is the mean between c plus and c minus.
So x isn't like intuitive, like it's just given.
Yeah, it's given. It's a new data point. You want to classify this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So your job right now is to determine whether x is green circle or red cross. So that's the data point you want to test. You test it just by computing its vector difference to the c, the center of the boundary. So that's a c, x minus c, which is in the middle. And then you just compute a dot product between them and look at the sign. If the sign is positive, it's one class. If negative, another class. Okay.
So our theta is, you have the vector with the x over here. Our theta is this single.
I think the theta is between, depends on the direction. So if you have a c plus minus c2, so I believe the theta is this. Yeah, between the two, that it's, yeah, so x minus c is direct to downward, and then so you have the direction of the vector and the theta is between them.
So if it's greater than
90 degree,
then
it belongs to, yeah, if it's 90 degree, you don't know which one it belongs to. And because this cosine theta is 0, then you don't have a positive and negative value, but it's jump across the 90 degree boundary, then you know, okay, it belongs to which group. So yeah.
So theta can be above 90 degrees though?
It's limited by the cosine theta, and because theta, if you have 180 degree, that will be 1. 90 degree will be 0.
Right, but I was just asking if that angle could be a more than 90, because it looks like in this diagram the angle is,
yeah, more than 90, it will come by as a positive and negative. So it's a, yeah, I think it certainly can be more than 90.
because then that's how you get the negative number, right? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a very quick way and very naive way, just use this geometric vectors to determine whether this new data point belongs to which group, depend on the cosine theta, the angle between this center point. You actually compute this vector because it's called with this angle, okay? And you use a sign to classify this. Well, the support vector machine is a little bit more complicated than that. So that's the point I'm going to make to see how we approach this. So this method will find data points which most close to the boundary of this straight line here. And the algorithm will do a kind of optimization to select a vector indicated by this W. Okay, we will link this W into the slope and the interception, because when you have a line in the plant, you will use, you are familiar with this interception and the slope definition, but it will be the same as a W, as a vector. So this vector you will using optimization to search. So it can separate green and the red points, and also make this boundary as wider as possible. So once you set up this, then the training is finished. Then you have new data points jumps in, and you will look at where they are located, the boundary, okay? Let's see, we need first prepare a couple of concepts. So how can we set up this optimization problem? Because you have so many different ways to set up this boundary, set up this intersection, set up this slope of this straight line. How can you look at this to do the optimization? Why you optimize this? Okay, so we are going to jump to prepare some of this underlying principle. We will need a concept of this. How can you compute the distance from a point to a line? So this is one way I found online, which geometric proof. I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to use my own way on Blackboard to illustrate. But that's one of the Wikipedia illustration. Then you can find explanation for how can you compute data point distance to a line which given by this equation. Another way is vector projection proof. Okay, reach to the same conclusion. But I'm going to use my own way. Okay, that will be my way. Okay, now I'm going to switch to Blackboard. So at the end, you will see, okay, this distance will be in this format. That's the point to a line given by the parameter in the W here. So once you know this equation, you will know, okay, all the optimization, the loss function you want to compute to give maximized level of the separation makes sense. Otherwise, for example, I say we are going to optimize the value to maximize this. This doesn't mean anything to you, which is this, right? So I'm going to explain why we needed to do this. Okay. So I'm going to use example to show okay, I have a straight line. This will be the position and it will cross. So that will be you know how to write this equation here. So I'm going to use slope and intercept. So this line can be written as y 5/3 times x plus 5. Make sure you think this correct. This correct. So if you have 3, so this point is 5/3, right? -3, 0. And here is 5, 0. So when x is 0, y is 5. When x -3, y is 0. So we call this 5/3 the intercept, which is slope, and we call 5 is intersection. Okay, everyone okay with this so far? That's we're familiar with this, but you can override this into 5x -3 plus 15. This is the same. Okay. You're familiar with representation of that because you can use x to compute y, but it's the same as this. Right? Now I'm going to rewrite these parameters into W. So here, W is 5 minus 3. So I use a vector to represent the parameters in my straight line definition. So if I have this, I can recreate. I also need this, of course. So I need a W and a C. So if you consider this a constant C, I need a W and a C to define my straight line. So that's fine. And now I'm going to write this xy into a point x. It's not a good notation, but I just want to use big X as a notation with the variable. So we can write the whole thing as W dot product X plus C. So C is 13. Okay, so you somehow can write translate this equation to a format like this. So this is more similar to what we have in the optimization function, and that's an easy way to write it. Okay, I have any data point on this line, I can satisfy this function here. If I have a line here, then its xy should be satisfied this equation. Okay, let's see what is this. This vector is not, it's not this. So if you have you move this to here, so 5, 3, 3. We do have a vector here with parallel to here, but this W is not, it's not that. So what is W, this vector?
What, like the intersections of X and Y?
No, if you look at the coordinates here, those 5, 3, so 5 at 5, and minus 3 is here.
Is that your orthogonal?
Yeah. So this vector actually is this, right? This is my W. So I try to draw, but it's not very good. I didn't draw it. But you can confirm this is orthogonal to So this is my W. You can do it either way, right? Okay, so that's my W here. By the way, I'm not so sure in the 3-dimensional whether this hyperplane will be, so because in 3 dimension you have X, Y, Z, then it's not a straight line that will be a plane. I don't know whether the plane this X parameter will be orthogonal, should be. Okay, but I have to go back and prove it myself. But for now, for this example, this will be orthogonal to that one. Okay. Now we are going to compute any given point. Let me see. I use. No, I have a given good point. I still use this generalized. I want to compute a distance from this data point to this straight line defined. So I want to compute this. Now, the problem right now is I am giving you the equation of this straight line here, defined by this and this C. And I'm giving you a data point in the plan, and then I want how far away from this data point to this straight line. Okay. Eventually, we will compute a straight line which separate all the data points. So we need to know all the data points to this line, the distance. It's our foundation. So how can we compute this D? Now look at the vector here, 2x. Okay, so that's my x. And that's a circle. Center between my W and the X, the given data. Okay, so this distance is the projection of this first. By the way, I don't know how long this is, but it just gave you the direction of W. Okay. Now, the D is this. That's what I want to compute. So this is the projection of X onto W, which is this. Green one minus this blue one. Okay. Let's see this, the vector, this point here is V. Okay. For you, it's very easy to compute the projection of X onto W. Right, because we have this dot product. So let's compute first this one, the green one. So green one is so this green one is a projection. Is this correct? The projection of X onto W.
Do we not want to find the projection of
X onto W?
yes, okay.
Yeah, because this is cosine. Okay. So I have this length then I'm going to minus this V. So my V is another. So see, V times W is length of V times W cosine theta. That's between them. Okay. Now we need this. So that's the length of V is V times W divided by this is correct because I have this relationship. For V and W, this is 0. Because there's no angle between V and the W. They are pointing to the same direction. So this gave me the length, the norm of V is just V W divided by W. Okay. So let me on this as a P. So I'm going to use P minus. So this is a P. Green bigger D minus the norm of V is the D what we need. So D is minus okay. Now the trick is WV. If you replace it with V, WV plus C, because V is a point on this straight line. So this is the trick. So you need to change WV into minus C. That's why WV minus C. So you plug this into the equation, you will get that. We plug this in here. Okay, so at the end, we have the equation, say the B plus C. So that's the final equation we want to derive. Okay, so we want to compute very quickly. If I have an X any point, and the line that's defined by W and C, and this equation. Yeah.
Could you go over that last relationship, W cross product V plus C is equal to 0?
Yeah, this because this is because V is a point in the line.
The original line that we started with, right? Defined by Y?
Yeah, V is here, so it's a point on the line defined by W and C. So that's why W times V dot product plus C is 0.
Okay.
If this is not clear, and you can go back to the another two ways of illustration. Say you want to use this geometric proof or that vector based. Maybe this is easy for you, but anyway, you will eventually reach to the same conclusion. That is, the distance can be right in this way. The distance. I mean, the distance, eventually you reach to this conclusion. Okay, just remember this form, and that's W dot the data point you're given, and then plus C and divided by the norm of the W. And then here we want to find a parameter for a straight line. Straight line can be defined by W and the B, the constant. So that's your data point X in there. So we want to define this to separate different classes of data points and allow this data points to the distance to this line to be as large as possible. Okay. You can find a line in different slope and interception. Eventually we'll get the distance from your tested data points to the line, the training data point to the line as much as possible. So you want to maximize the distance. Okay, because you can define many different lines to separate them. So you want to find a solution which makes the distance from the data points to the line the largest. Okay, here is the way to represent the normalization problem. So you want to find the parameter of W to maximize the value. So to maximize the whole thing And inside here is the data points which close the minimized, the data points close to the line. Okay, so you don't care about those general data points. You only found those data points which closed the nearest to the line, and this minimum means you found those data points in the boundary which close to the line you are going to design to separate them. You only consider those points, and you try to make the distance between the small nearest data points to the line maximize. Okay. Okay, we can stop here. And the purpose of this slide is not to give you the clear definition or anything, but I want you to recognize the format of this. When you see this, you know, okay, this is a data point to the line, the distance. And you want to maximize this distance for the nearest points. Those nearest points are the important ones to help you to separate classes. Okay, let's take a break here, 5 minutes. Yeah, let me. Okay. Okay, let's restart. I just want to further confirm that how this will be done. So now we just realized the D is very easy to compute if I am giving any line. So any line can be defined using W and C, right? And if I have a data point, Cx, to compute the distance, I just times this plus C divided by the norm of W. So that's my D for X. Okay, a line can be defined by, let me see, the distance from here is that. So what I will do is, if I have points here, I will change my parameters C and W. So I can define 3 lines here. So this is one of the lines given. Then I will compute all the distance from all the points to the line here. Okay, because you have your equation, and it is so easy to compute this D, because this can be all the data points in there, and you have a vector of D. It's computed by one operation with matrix space. So you have all the distance from all the data points to this line, and you change the parameter of W, change the C, you will change the D. Okay. Now, so once you have the D, you found the smallest D here. For example, you found, okay, that's my option here. For the right points, This is my selected. So that's my minimum distance. So minimum D, minimum D for the green, and that's minimum D for red. Okay, I will only look at these two regarding to my current separation is line here. Okay, I will select parameters to make this distance as large as possible. Okay, so this distance will be this plus that. Okay, so that's my optimal. Object. Want to make this distance large. Okay. Okay, so that's the same idea which I just present on the white board here, and you try to maximize this. Well, sometimes you have noise. For instance, this blue point is supposed to be right lower portion of this, and also this right point is not in the right group. So we are going to use a soft margin SVM, so it allows some of the mistakes happen instead of only select the most the hard margin, and that's what we just discussed. For instance, in the example on your right side, if you consider the hard margin, then you will select this right line as a separation between green and the right class. But if you allow soft margin and allow some mistakes, okay, so for example, if you treat this as a misclassified or training data contents or noise, then you will treat this. You just ignore it or do something with it. And then the separate line will be the green line, make them more separable. And the green one may have better discriminant power at the end, because if you have a new data comes in, and this green line may give you the better separation and the prediction of your classification problem. Okay. So in that case, the soft margin idea is to have a likelihood. So this for optimization purpose, not only consider the W, not only consider the boundary, separate two classes clearly, but also consider allow some of the mistakes. Okay, give extra parameters to allow some of them in there. But this is a function, you just cannot have allowed. So once you have allowed, your loss function will increase, and the optimization will not give that a reasonable solution, but it allows some of the mistakes. So you can tune the function of this to add a little bit to the loss function, allow them to be there.
C, that's not C times the number of mistakes, or is C defined as
A function, so you can see, okay, if I have a mistake 3, I will times 0.3 on them to give some weight of number of that. So if you have a exponential function in there, then if you have a 3, it's okay. 5, 6, then the number just too high, just quickly not satisfied any of this. So the C will be a function to allow you to adjust the weight you gave to the mistakes. So C here is a hyperparameter, so you can predefine the C. So you want your classifier to tolerant to a lot of mistakes, then you can have a small c, I believe, here. And yeah, and if you have a larger c, and c is sensitive, a little bit of noise, then mistakes, then c will expand it. Then in that case, you will keep the small margin. So that's a so-called hyperparameter. It's predefined classifier training procedure. So we have a hard margin, soft margin. Now the problem is if it's not linearly separable, what to do? So that's where we are going to introduce the kernel concept. Yeah, I think it's still easier to explain here. If you have a problem like non-linearly separable, I do a very simple. Okay, this is 0.10. This is 0, 1. And let's see, this is straight line here. At this point, see 0.5, 0.5. Another. This should be 2.5, 0.75. Okay, I have four data points. 2 of them belong to the red cross, and another 2 is in the straight line of this, and it's in the green class. For this problem, you just don't have a straight line separation solution. You just cannot see. I want to define a straight line to separate these 4 points into 2 groups. Okay. So how can you solve this problem? So any suggestion from online students?
could you try to, instead of using a line, could you try to use a curve to define separation points?
Yeah, that's right. So if you have decided to use a curve, it's possible, yes. There's an easy way to solve this. It's called feature space, or whatever, VBI. Feature space expansion. So I'm going to use, so if you use nonlinear separation, it's possible. So you have more parameters to optimize. But if you have this feature space expansion technique, you can do that easily. Still using linear separation to separate those data points. So I'm going to do a transformation. So do a transformation. So 0, 1, I will transform and make them the product become 0. And 2, 5. So I will what the transformation here applied here is x times y. Okay. This will become 2, 5. Will be still 0. I don't know what's this one, but anyway, this will be a non-zero value, right? Now I transform my 4 data points from a 2-dimension to 3-dimension in this way. Now they become separable. So my transformation function I use is x times y. So how much for this? 0.25 times 0.75?
0.1875.
75, whatever. Okay, so now this 4 data point becomes separable because any plan between 0 and 0.18 will separate them. So this is the idea of feature mapping function. So I'm using a feature mapping function. Feature mapping. Do a transformation to map my original space, data points in the original space, into a higher dimension feature space. When the feature means you have more variables to define each data point. So in this case, I use 2D to 3D to make them become separable.
What is this? I'm having a hard time with the fact you're going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 dimensions to 1
Mm-hmm.
dimension.
For instance, right now you can use yeah. So if you plot them out, that will be 2 values. These 2 values will stand out from this, right? Because the x, y is still there, z.
So your z is your 3rd dimension.
The 3rd
Your
dimension.
product
So this jump out to 0.25, this jump to 0.18.
Okay.
So there is a plan that can separate them by cutting these 2 point jump out away from the rest still stay on the plan.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
So so here, for example, you can have a way to use a kernel system. Kernel system is defined by a feature mapping function and also the feature, the kernel function as well. There's some relationship between them. The kernel function will be transformation will equal to the feature function transformation and inner product. So some relationship between them. So sometimes people use the kernel as a short name to explain this expansion of feature space. In this case, you have a data points in the middle. So if you do this transformation correctly, you will be able to put one class in a higher dimension that makes them to separable from the red from the green points. Okay. So that's another example. It's very similar to what I just present on the blackboard here, and that's value here is -1, -1, and here is yeah. So that's 1, 1. I believe. That's -1. Right. Then the transformation it does also using this x times y, and then suddenly they become separable. There are other feature mapping functions like those ones, more complex. But the idea is the same. So depending on your problem, sometimes one kind of a feature mapping function like this will just work. And sometimes you may want to use slightly more complex transformation feature mapping functions to make them suddenly become separable. It wasn't possible before. So this is the magic. That's another illustration that's from 1 dimension to 2, and be using the squared. So that's those points in the middle of 0, and any squared transformation will make the shape them up, and then you can separate them easily. Okay, I believe this is 0 somewhere here. Linearly separable after you add that in.
So before, when we were using sort of dimension reduction to simplify things to create or to separate points, now we're kind of adding a dimension.
Yeah, that's
to separate
right.
the points. Okay.
Yeah, we are making the data point separable on the higher dimension instead of reduce the dimension, make them separable. But we increase the dimension and they become suddenly separable. That's for training. Okay, the train data, then you have new data in, you deal with it at in the same way. Then the trained classifiers will be able to separate them. So that's the idea about the kernel method, do this feature expansion and plug in this SVM. Now everything we are going to play, instead of in the original space, we are talking about SVM in the featured mapping space, the higher dimension space. Okay. So that's called the Gaussian kernel. We use a lot. So you need to find the center of your data point, which is the Z, and then you compute the distance from all the data points to the center, and then transform. I come back to this figure. So now, in this example, I'm going to find the center Z. Out right here. So I want to change the color so you can see. So I found the center Z here. And I compute the distance from all the data points. All the data points, say, for example, from X x to z, the distance, right, on the distance, and then transform this distance using the Gaussian, this curve function.
We're assuming that everything is normally distributed.
Yeah. In this case, we assume it. So if it's close by, then my transformation will put the z value higher. If it's far away from the center, I will put them lower. At the end, they become more or less separable. A short video just illustrate points. Okay, so this again explain the feature space here. You have input space that's original, and the data points are not separable linearly. As Alex suggests, you can describe a curve, which this curve will be difficult to define. You need it. So which kind of curve you want to use, how many parameters you want to use. But if you have a simple transformation function phi here and transpose your data points into higher dimension, and you play everything in the high dimension feature space, in this case, the +1, 2 dimension to 3, and they become linearly separable. So you can apply the original format of the SVM without considering the combinations of parameters to define nonlinear curve. Okay. Let's have some description of the kernel method officially. So kernel method class of algorithms for pattern and analysis. So SVM is one of the most commonly common member of this group of the kernel-based method applied to there. And for classification and for data, so task. So the role representation has to be transformed into feature vector representation using feature mapping function. Okay, so you can define your own function to do this. But normally we have a lot of predefined kernel functions you can select from. Okay. Kernel function. Okay, I don't think you will understand this part because the kernel function is predefined, but there are some features which we call satisfy this so-called kernel trick. So it allow you to compute the covariance or dot product of data points in high dimensional, but not directly compute them, but using kernel function to compute, but you achieve the same results. Let's see how I can describe. So the kernel function will satisfy a relationship of this. So you apply your kernel function between two given data points in original space, and the results of this is a dot product of these two data points in higher feature function, feature space, which these two data points has already been transformed by the function, feature function of phi. And in the high dimensional feature space, their inner product equal to the value of the kernel function results in the original space. Well, the reason you want to find this special kernel function is in the high dimensional, to try to separate the data points, a lot of computation rely on the dot product between data points. However, your feature function and the dot product is not so easy to compute. It takes longer to compute, but the feature function is easy to compute in the low dimensional space. So you want to use this particular feature kernel function to replace the inner product you will have to compute in the higher dimensional space. It's kind of shortcut in the computation. So this is an example to show you what I talk about, the kernel function between two data points. The results is 1024 equal to the dot product between two transformed two data points transformed in the high dimensional space. You play with this example, you will see, okay, this is true, and that's why the kernel function is true to do that, to give you a cheap way to compute the dot product of data points in the transformed higher dimensional space. This is one example that why you want to use that. Why you want to use dot product between points in the higher dimensional space. So this is a transform. So you see this covariance computation require dot product between this transformed. It's called the kernel Pca. So we know when you compute for the Pca, you need to have covariance matrix. Covariance matrix contains all the dot product between data points features. So now we are doing the kernelized Pca. So you will transform your data into high dimensional, but eventually you have to compute the dot product between this transformed data in high dimensional. It's difficult. So we don't do that. We just compute the dot product using kernel function in the low dimension, reach the same kind of results here. So, but that's just illustrated the use of this dot product in the high dimension. So in kernel Pca, if you don't do the phi transformation, then you won't be able to separate these data points. It's already split out the data points by the largest variability. But after your transformation, you create new data points and they become separable using the regular Pca work on the high dimensional space. But eventually you still have to compute the covariance between data points. And the kernel trick will allow you to avoid to compute dot products in the high dimensional space. But this is not a direct link. But that's just show you the dot product between data points will be useful to do some of this separation or for data points in high dimensional. Okay, so we will create some example data like this, and that's a kernel function I can define. So once you transform your data using PCA, you will get separatable results. Well, if you don't, you get results like this, in the original. This function is Gaussian kernel. Okay. Okay. Well, I only have 20 minutes. I don't think I can finish Receptor profiling, but I will go through some of the slides, then we can leave to next lecture or for the computer session. Okay. So do you have any questions for SVM or kernel methods?
So kernel is basically just an equation that you plug your original data into that gives you a single number that makes your data separable.
Yeah, you can see that. I would say when you see a single word, a kernel, so I would refer to a kernel method system. So this kernel method system will contain feature mapping function. And if you want to use a kernel trick, then the kernel function will be associated. So it's not a single word, means a lot of things. So normally people, if you see kernel, they will imply also the similarity matrix between data points. Because kernel relates to the dot product between data points, and dot product between data points are similarity between data if you fill up in the in this kind of covariance-like matrix. So I mean, it's difficult to explain what a kernel, just single word means, because it contains the whole system, the kernel function, feature mapping function, and the kernel trick, and the kernelized method. A lot of things linked suddenly. Difficult to explain just using C. Okay, it is what. And when people talk about the kernel, they always want to mention SVM, because SVM is one of the methods use kernelized method a lot. I would say kernel is a system transformation method. You transform your low dimensional to high dimensional space through this kernel operation, and you have to make them either more separable linearly or yeah, so you plug in the features.
So I totally understand that part. It's like when you're in stats and you're trying to transform your data so you can actually do stats on it.
Yeah.
It's just the not having to do the math behind it. Like say your original point is like 3, and then you raise it to like the third power to like transform it. Now it's in 3 dimensions. So instead of going in and figure out your X, Y, and Z, it just gives you the singular data for that.
No, you still play with your training data. So your training data not separable originally, but when higher dimension becomes separable, so you keep that configuration. So once you have a new data point comes in 3 lower dimension, you still do the transformation and look at their whether it is separate in the high dimensional in the classifier you trained already, and whether this group, which group it belongs to. Okay. Okay, so human adaptive immune system rely on those lymphocytes and mostly T cell, B cells. We call it adaptive because it's not like innate immune system. You just have anything which is foreign object that will attack, like macrophages will start to attack it directly. And the adaptive system like a T cell, B cell, you can somehow train the whole system. And if you already experienced those pathogens before, and the corresponding T cell will be able to memorize the encounters of those foreign operations. And next time when you have the same pathogen comes in, you're adaptive to the and have a quicker response. So this is through a kind of system to first establish a highly diverse population of T cell, B cell systems. And also this T cell, B cell systems will be response to specific antigens and amplified specific subpopulation of T cell. And these subpopulations are defined by their surface receptors. So in this system, we are going to see how single cell study can help you to understand at a single cell level the diversity of the specificity, diversity of the adaptive system of so lymph cells, defined by the diversity of the proteins surface receptors. Well, that's indicate the process. You have a dendritic cell or macrophage present the antigen to give to the T cell. So T cell is created and matured in the thymocyte, and then hasn't been exposed to any particular antigen, but this presence of the antigen will make it transform its surface receptor into particular subtypes. This receptor contains subdomains, and the subdomains all these different chains, and they have variable regions. So because it's combinatory effects, so you can have different combinations of subdomains to create particular combinations of those subunit of subchains of receptors, so give you different types of subtypes of receptors. And they have different binding affinity to antigen presented by the antigen presenting cells. So the cell with receptor subtypes which highly affinity to this antigen will get the signal strongly, and the colony of this type will expand it in the T cell population. So eventually you will have a large amount of this specifically target to the specific antigen has been exposed to. I hope many of you have this background to understand this. Let's see, in human, for example, we have different T cell receptor genes. We have alpha, beta, gamma, third, and the majority of this will be alpha, beta type. And this are not single gene. This cluster of many different type of genes, different kind of genes, have different segments and located in different arms of the chromosome. And for example, T cell receptor alpha genes located in chromosome 14, For example, if you move to that's chromosome 7, I think I'm showing you chromosome 7 and the T cell receptor beta chain and the different variations of these chains. You see there are many different subclusters of the same gene, but it's slightly different in their protein coding peptide sequence. Within a T cell, any of these can express, and I don't know why any one of them will express, but for one given T cell, maybe just one type of this beta subunit chain will highly express, and the product will be on the surface of the T cells. And so this particular T cells will be showing you, for example, TRBV5/4 will be on the surface, and plus the alpha chain, and then make the specific T cell subtype, not subtype, but the T cell receptor isoform. See that. And also this is that's chromosome 14. You have alpha chain. You also have many different sub variation. Same idea for the B cell. It produce antigen, antibody instead of a T cell receptor. But same idea. You have the complementary combinations through gene rearrangement. So that's happened in the somatic cellular level. You select one of the domain for variation from a different base chain subunit through the combination, and then you have the whole T cell receptor specifically for that particular T cell. Okay, because each of these different domain or subunit chain contains subunit different variations of the genes. So the combination of this will create the 10 to the 14 combinations by only look at VDJ recombination or cell gene rearrangement combinations. And also because they are also paired, because each T cell receptor have alpha and the beta domain. So each beta domain have 10 to the 14 combinations, the alpha domain have 10 to the 7. So combined, you have a 10 to the 21 pairs of possibilities to give you the foundation of a large variability of the T cell receptors. This is a large number. Okay, any comment, questions so far? I think we can stop here because we run out of time. So this just gave you an idea. Then the different T cell have a different set of the T cell receptor subunit expressed in it. Then you have these different possibilities of combinations that give you the foundation to do the adaptive immune response to respond to different antigens using different subtypes of the T cells. So this week I will, we will stop here today. And any other questions? Okay, if no further questions, I will see you in Thursday computer lab.